I will get started. First of all, hello, beautiful people, and welcome to the fourth session of my webinar series, webinar accessibility series. When I planned the series at the beginning of this year, I initially only planned Laura as a backup in case I suddenly went into labor and had to go to the hospital. But the deeper I got into the topic planning throughout the whole year, I, of course, realized that Laura is not just a backup, but she has to be on stage with me and definitely be a part of this series and with her knowledge and especially the Pokedex of Accessibility, which fits wonderfully with today's topic and which we will show you today. A short anecdote about the picture of us. So the photo shows us at our first workshop we held together last year at the We Are Developers Conference in Berlin, and we are still going strong together, as you can see. So welcome, Laura, also for joining me today in this session. I will shortly go over the agenda, and also if you have any questions, please feel free, write them into the chat or write them in the Q&A section in case you want to stay anonymous. We will go through the questions at the end of the webinar. And yeah, of course, the recording will be online in the next few days, as well as the transcript and the slides. Everything is available for you to watch afterwards also. So today's agenda. I would first like to talk about my very first accessibility audit, which I did last year, and which helped me a lot, especially me as a developer who is more interested in the technical parts of accessibility than good at general knowledge about accessibility and the guidelines and disabilities and such. And yeah, I would like to share my experiences with you. After that, we finally, after 3 sessions, take a deep dive into the web accessibility guidelines, which I have already mentioned several times in the previous webinars, but I have only ever covered them briefly. And this is also where the Pokedex of Accessibility comes into play, which is intended to loosen up the rather dry topic and difficult to understand topic of web accessibility guidelines, and make learning about it a little bit more enjoyable and fun. And finally, I will talk a bit about open source, which is not just for developers, but for every developer team member, and can help you get better at accessibility and learn to learn skills if you don't have the chance to do so in your current job. So let's start with the accessibility audit. At my, how should I put it? So at my gym, they were eager to learn about accessibility. And Laura and I thought this is really cool because this is what we are talking about all the day. And we realized that in our gym, they have a few members who have different kind of disabilities, like low vision, or also being blind and still going into the gym, and have also private sessions and are very welcome, and everything is in the gym itself. Also, well, I'm already. I would say they tend to have a very inclusive way in the outside and an image on the outside. And we thought that it would be a good idea to also show that via their website. And they have 2 websites, and one of them I did an accessibility audit, and which made me realize that I, as a developer, I do understand how to make a website more accessible and where to look at, how to test, where to fix it. But it's quite difficult if you are not just a one-person team to also explain it to others. And I think this is when I realized that I really struggle with the whole guideline things, because in the beginning, I actually did not care what the problem is in a definition kind of way, but just when I saw there's a color contrast issue, then I adjusted the color contrast, or if I saw that the focus is not visible, then I added a focus and stuff like this. But to explain this to other people who have no clue at all what web accessibility is, but want to improve their website and maybe working with WordPress, so there's not so much technical knowledge for them, or also as a manager of the gym, they still want to know what's going on the web. Why is it not accessible? Well, what does it even mean that the website is not accessible? It is quite a challenge for me, and that's why I think it's a good practice to write an accessibility audit and make it as detailed as possible. And I want to share with you, first of all, my template. I will give it online afterwards, and you can check it out and use it as you wish. And how I created the whole audit. In my personal opinion, maybe now I would do it differently, but this was my first time doing it, and I thought in the beginning using Google Docs seemed cool and easy. And for me, it was also better to understand, because I thought in the time I started writing this audit, they added these cool tabs. And I thought this is a great way to have everything in one document for the developer they had, and to better understand and to better structure the document. But actually, after a few months, I realized that I never checked if Google Docs, or how I prepared all my information, if this would even be accessible. So I created it while thinking that the person who is receiving the audit will be able to navigate as I do with a mouse or with a touchpad without any restrictions. But now, of course, I would first of all check, is the tool I'm using accessible, or is the structure understandable or more understandable, and maybe a different tool would have been better to use. But this is what I did for my very first audit, so I was still proud of it, how I structured it. And of course, I did at least the minimum, which we all know from HTML, that provides there's a title, and using the headings properly, so that every heading has also the format of heading, and the text is also marked as a text, and there are different sections, looking at the color contrast when adding the links, that they have underlines. So the simple stuff is of course covered in the document itself, but yeah, I never checked it with a screen reader, and this is what I would do now. And also, if you are going to write the first audit, maybe for your personal website, just for practicing reason, or you find a local company which you can help make their website more accessible, and also providing and writing an audit, then I would suggest, please make also sure that the tool you're using and the files you share with them, that this is all accessible to them. So how did I start? I first thought for the audit to point out why I'm even doing this. So what's the point of this audit? So I structured it into 4 tabs, or into 4 parts. The first part is the general information about why are we doing this audit, what the audit contains, and what they will get out of it. After that, I shared my automatic accessibility errors in one document, then the manual errors I found, and the last part is the accessibility statement they also want to put on their website to show the users that they care about accessibility. So for the general information, I shared what the audit is about, who am I and who is my client. I also mentioned already in the document is part of accessible, because after that, I realized I did never check with screen reader or with tab. Then a small forward that who is the audit for. In case I write it in short form, it's always great to have abbreviations explained in the first appearance, and then you can use the short form to go further with and to make it easier to write. The benefits of accessibility in general, explain them, what actually is accessibility and how many people have some sort of disability and how it would improve the gym's SEO and how they appear in front of their users. Then I also mentioned the Accessibility Act and also the rules we have in our country. So maybe if you're in a different country, it would be cool if you also write down what different rules you may have or specific rules in your country you have. Mention it in the beginning in the forward. This is the part you're focusing on. And also how I reported the structure. And this is also a part which took me very long to understand how to start and make it easy to go for the others to better understand accessibility. And in the end, it helped me also to understand it better how the structures or the guidelines are working. So I wanted to make sure that that they understand I'm looking for errors they have on the website, but I'm not only focusing on the errors which are for the web accessibility guidelines to fulfill them, but also to take a look at the warnings to go beyond compliance. And that what is the scope on which WCAG criteria do I which guidelines do I focus on? So I chose the latest 2.2, and that I'm not only going to fulfill AA, which is at least we're aiming for AA, because this would be a legal requirement, not of course at this specific company, because this is a small company and it's a gym and they do not have to be compliant, but no reason for me to not do it anyways and to go beyond compliance to AAA. The scope, and when I started to test it, or when I started to create the document and the two websites for the automatic testing and also for the manual testing, which tools I was using at the moment. The XDev tools, I talked about them in my latest webinar series, the automatic testing tools, the accessibility insights, web contrast checker, keyboard, the reporting tools to structure the errors better. I also made a suggestion how they could navigate this file in case I also assumed they're using Google. This was also a bit weird because I started working in Google, and also as in Word, it's always good when you are in a company and everyone are using the same tools. But of course, if you're going to use Google and they never worked with Google documents or something such, then it can always be complicated, or that they do not perceive the tool as I do, because maybe they use a different version or such. So I explained that they can either go linked everything from the tabs, or also they can navigate via the left side tab. I also put in links for official documents in case they want to read further, but I also tried in this document, I tried to explain it in my words, which is also, I think, a good training for yourself, because when you have questions about certain parts you are writing, then you realize that you weren't that good in explaining as you may have thought. Then a short glossary about different terms. We are used to it, but someone who have never done anything with accessibility before, they maybe never saw the short form of accessibility or what AT means or WCAG or such. So all these words I also explained in the introduction audit. Then I also explained the user impact we are going to talk about when I'm structuring the errors I found. And this is also good for you to understand that not every issue you're finding has the same value. So there are critical issues which are really blockers, that someone cannot perceive anything of the website at all, and going down to the minor that it would be cool if you have a heading 1, for example, on your website, but it's not that important that someone could not use the whole website just because you're missing an H1. But this should help you understand what is important, what has the most priority, and also maybe thinking about when working in a team, how would you prioritize it when fixing the issues? Because when you have a sprint for 2 weeks and there are only 3 days left, guess you would not work on a ticket which will take you 1 week because you only have 3 days left. So it's for you to understand when there's an error in the development part, for example, how long would it take you? And yeah, after some practices and after working on the same issues again and again, you will realize how long you will take for certain issues to fix. This would also be part of, I mean, not of the impact, but of the priority on how to fix the issues. I also made use of, when creating the errors, what kind of disabilities are affected, like the low vision, color blindness. I added some icons I thought back then would be, the emoticons would be cool. Now I'm sure they are not accessible when wanting to use the document with a screen reader, but I chose them back then to help the developer better understand the different disabilities, and they can always refer back to them. And then some accessibility FAQs, what is accessibility, digital accessibility, and such. This is all, overall information about accessibility, web accessibility, and certain disabilities for my client to better understand what's going on in the document. The most interesting part, I would say, for the developer, or also for us when we are looking for errors and we are writing the tickets, is of course the audit itself, and to do the automatic testing, where I shared, first of all, how many issues I found with automatic testing in general, and also understand how to divide them, that we have errors, which would be the critical and serious ones, and that we have warnings. And also how many categories this would, in how many categories of accessibility issues there are, and on how many pages. And also, I would not rely on these numbers anymore, because I realized how often I misunderstood a guideline back then. So I would say my numbers are not accurate that much. I hoped for back then in a year, but we are all learning and we're all getting better. I provided a table with the name of the tickets and how often they occur on the sites. These are all the automatic testing issues, so it was very easy because XDevTools, for example, shows me already the list, which and the name, so I did not have to come up with the name, but it was already there. I also created a table with the user impact and how often these number of errors occurred. And I think it would be cool if you create at the end of the audit, you could create a graph showing how many errors you had in the beginning, and over time how they went better with the actual number of errors. Could be cool. So for a dashboard, for example, if you have to provide a dashboard, it would be good for them to, or better for them to understand, I guess, how they impacted it with their adjustments, how the website went better. Then another table I created with also the name of the issue and what severity they had. And what I thought is cool about Google Docs is that you could, for example, add these chips where you can easily change the different types. This made the usage a bit easy for me and also a bit more fun because the colors were already chosen, and I think this refreshed a bit for me creating the audit, and not doing the dry audit I often see in other or in real companies, and not when I do it in private. And then I started to explain the specific issue, like if the button must have a discernible text, what is the problem, or why is the problem, which disabilities are affected, like blind users, and what is the recommended action, which actually links to the DQ University, because as we know from our previous sessions, they have very detailed explanation about every issue and also their safety. And this is also still very not how I would put it, but more in a professional way of writing. So until then, I still do not believe the developer who has experience of accessibility would understand easily, but I just wanted to make it more professional in the beginning. What does this mean? How is the user impact? How that the screen user cannot discern the purpose of the element when there's not an accessible name. And I did this for all the issues I mentioned in the tables. And the part which was for me the most interesting one is, of course, as a developer, how to fix them. So there is the last section is my recommended actions for improving accessibility. Would be I tried to make it as detailed as possible, where the actual problem is, like which page is affected, which component is affected, what is the problem, like the ARIA label there was missing, and the code example I shared. This is the current version of the code part which has the issue, and also the updated version where they should add something or delete something, and make additional comments in case certain things were updated, and this could make a change automatically in this issue. Try to understand the whole application and to always be able to give the best solution possible. And when they want to learn more about the whole topic about the button, also shared the link to the DQ University for the developer to understand better or more about it, not just the one I pointed out. And I think doing this for all these different issues I have found, and starting to explain in my own words what's the problem and how to fix it, help improve as a developer, of course, or as an accessibility specialist, but also trying to get more into the web accessibility guidelines, which are really dry and often hard to understand. So I would say that if you do the practice and start using it, then you will get better at it. And I think you do not have to be a developer to do an audit. Maybe you cannot, when you're a designer, you will not be able to write the whole code part, but I do not think this is necessary. It always depends on who you are working with. If there's a developer who is already very experienced in his of being a developer, like a senior developer, and the only struggle they have is accessibility, then I think you do not have to have the knowledge about code, and you can still be able to write an audit, or as a tester or as a project manager. I would suggest trying it out for your personal project or a project locally or stuff like this, just for practicing reasons. The same as I said, I did with the manual testing, providing all the tables, providing all the tickets, the severity explained, so the impact explained, the success criteria explained and linked, and in the end, my personal recommendation on how to fix it. Last, I also shared the accessibility statement, which can be created by everyone, going to the Web3C accessibility statement generator tool, which actually gives you a lot of the information I also am using here. The important thing is that you write how you have tested it, the process and the assistive technology. I would even suggest to write down the version of each of it. And also what's important is what the limitations and alternatives are. So in this case of the website I was testing is that they use a third-party widget, the mind body, and this is absolutely not accessible. And yeah, we have to write it down and admit that this is not accessible. But if there is a problem, like you want to log into the mind body app or so, we have to provide an alternative by writing them an email, for example. Always be open if there is an issue and that you're going to fix it or that you provide an alternative. Yes, this would be it for my accessibility audit and how I experienced it and started to write it. And I will share with you the template. I really hope that you're also going to use it and to do an audit by yourself, so you can become better at understanding the impact of the code, of the success criteria, of the WCAG and such, and help you learn with it to become better. And now I want to go over to understanding the web accessibility in general, but in detail more the guidelines and what are the poor principles and what are the success criteria. So what is the WCAG? So the WCAG is a guideline by the W3C provided, which should help you understand the problems of web accessibility, what errors can occur, and how to fix them. And these guidelines, I also linked it for the understanding docs. I think this is the most easier way to understand the documents, to learn about them. And the guidelines are divided into 4 principles, which are, so that's why they are called poor. The 4 principles are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And each of these principles also have guidelines. In general, there are 13 guidelines, and these 13 guidelines are containing success criteria, which are in total 86, if I'm not mistaken, 86 success criteria in total. I'll show you this in a smaller chart. These are the 4 principles, and they have so the same value, so nothing is more important than the other, and the guidelines for each principle. So for example, for perceivable, how do we perceive the website, maybe by a text alternative, or with a time-based media, is it adaptable and is it distinguishable? For example, this would be color contrast issues. I mean more in the sense of when there's no color, that you do not rely on color alone, or is and all of these have several success criteria. The same goes for Operable, which has something to do with keyboard accessibility or assistive technology accessibility. Is it navigable, and the input modalities, different input types, and is it understandable? There are also in this one many new success criteria who are falling under the AAA, because understandable has more to do with cognitive disabilities and are providing lots of guides when it comes to abbreviation. Is a term explained very detailed so everyone could understand? And the last one is robust. It has only one guideline, and I think in the WCAG 2.2 are also only one success criteria. It has more to do with different versions of the system and browser. And that's how, when the Pokedex of Accessibility comes into play. Then when we look at the poor principles, we could see them as the different teams back then when Pokemon came out, that divide them into these teams like Team Red and Team Blue and Green, which never came out in Austria or Europe, but in Japan, and Team Yellow. And we're also moving further with the colors of each of them to make the WCAG more appealing and understandable. And this is also, I think, where Laura comes into play and takes over.
Yes, because the Pokedex of Accessibility has been it started kind of as a joke. Like, if you were to explain the web content guidelines in terms of Pokemon, what Pokemon would color contrast be, for example, that was like Bulbasaur, because it has 3 success criteria, and you need definitely at least 3 lines of evolution. Yeah, that's the term. To reflect that. And that made me think there are multiple success criteria that have multiple levels. So you have single A, you have double A, and you have triple A, but not all of them do. So within the Pokemon universe, you'll find corresponding themes on Pokemon and success criteria. Not all of them do have 3 evolutions. Some of them have 2. Some only have 1. Like if you think about Latias. And then you also have special cases. For example, what would be the ditto of accessibility? We still haven't found a definitive answer for that one. But within the guidelines, so the poor principles, what would that be? We settled on the different teams to kind of distinguish them, because types didn't seem to correspond enough. Like, there are too many types to fit it in. But with the teams you have in the original set, at least, it adds up pretty well. And then within them, you have special Pokemon. So, of course, Perceivable is one big category. Not all of them have as many Pokemon, I would say, or success criteria. Because, a bit of a history, the web content guidelines were heavily focused on visual disabilities in the first iteration. And with each iteration, they became broader and broader. Now, in the last one, the 2.2 update, we also see a lot more of cognitive accessibility. And this is also where more success criteria on low cognitive load, authentication, so such things come into play. So we're seeing them evolve like Pokemon, like the Pokemon games, like the storylines, to include different types as well. And what we also have, of course, we brought some examples. So within time-based media, you will notice that here are captions, and I'm going to include sign language and captions as an extension of language here. Those are basically success criteria in different iterations, because you have captions for pre-recorded content, which would be this webinar once it is recorded and goes onto YouTube. You have for pre-recorded, although live events are also possible, but live events don't really apply to web content guidelines. They have different event guidelines, and they're not really published by the Web3 Consortium because they focus on web content so far. But we can group them all together into, this is content, this is video content and audio content, and how do we make it accessible for people who don't rely on their hearing to consume media. So captions and sign language would be the way to go. If we group them together in one, there was Mime Junior and Mr. Mime, for example. Special one here, it's the Galatian form, if I remember correctly, of Mr. Rhyme, because it is kind of in the same family but not exactly the same Pokemon. Sorry, newest versions, and a heavy fan of Mr. Rhyme. But this is kind of the idea behind the Pokedex of Accessibility, that you take the success criteria and match them with Pokemon, just to understand the success criteria more and how they relate to each other. So they all fit into the same group. I can definitely see any challenger in the Pokedex having this specific setup of Pokemon and challenging you with them, because they most often have themed. And so what we have here is in the style of the Pokemon cards, instead of the name, to double check what each Pokemon named in English actually before we started. Then also that they're within the perceivable type. Yes, this is where we actually use perceivable as the type instead of the game. We had to put it on the card somehow. You have a QR code that leads you to the understanding docs. You need more information, you want to learn more, you want to go a bit deeper and see how you can put it into context. In general, the understanding docs are just very, very well. And also one thing that I like to say when I talk about web accessibility, you do not need to know everything. You never have to, basically. You just need to know where to look and just save that somewhere, or have a shortcut somewhere on your desktop, wherever, bookmarks. Just save it somewhere. If you know where to look it up, you're good for your sources. And you will also notice that the captions keep getting stronger. So, well, the benefits of the captions keep increasing with each iteration. Because the idea is that you don't just want to put a single baseline, the bare minimum that you need to fulfill in order to achieve compliance. As Julia said before with her accessibility audit, the goal shouldn't be just compliance, it should be going beyond compliance and going for excellence. Because accessibility is the baseline of usability. And if we achieve excellent accessibility, we have way better usability, because our usability baseline basically gets pushed to the next level. And just with Pokemons, you don't want to stick with the baseline evolution. You want the best one. You want the best team. You want to finish the game. You want to 100% the game. And you want to be a Pokemon champion. So why don't we strive for accessibility championships as well? And that means instead of sticking with our level 2 compliance, we aim for level 3. In this case, the sign language pre-recorded, because it is the highest evolution of this type of success criteria. That's also why this is a AAA. Here would be single content is the minimum baseline to make it accessible to people who are hard of hearing or deaf. Having captions live makes your live events accessible, so it is well argued in a case for captions and sign language. Pretty obviously, there is affected. So people who would be deaf or hard of hearing, either in the case of sign language, maybe from birth, maybe it's different, as accessible for them to partake, but also contribute to, especially in live events. If you have good on-site Dolmetsch translators, it makes it a lot easier for participants to contribute to discussion as well, because if you are reliant on sign language, you are also reliant on a translator most of the time, because sign language is just not as well known within each language. And also internationally speaking, each sign language has their local variant. So in Austria, we have Austrian Sign Language, America has American Sign Language, Great Britain has British Sign Language. Yes, some signs might be similar within each other, but not necessarily the same. And it also doesn't mean that people can communicate with the same sign language if they're from different countries. So having dolmetschers on site adds a lot to this. So just a bit of an excursus, that would also be a AAA. And yeah, you see that on the bottom of the cards, which disabilities are affected. Yeah, and also the impact in the case of if you literally cannot hear what is being said and discussed, you cannot partake in the discussion. So this is very much critical. All right, so the next one for Operable. Let's focus on like seizures and physical reactions for this one, because if you have watched Pokemon in the early days, you may remember that infamous Pokemon episode of Porygon, the computer warrior, which caused seizures that got a specific animation technique for Pikachu's Thunderbolt, which is a paka-paka. It's called the paka-paka animation and strobe effect. So it used, I think it was like 12 hertz frequency of blue and red alternating just entire screen, basically. And if we look into those success criteria, they tell us to exactly not do that in order to avoid triggering a seizure. So this is why we decided Porygon would be the poster child for this one. Use 3 flashes or below to make sure you don't trigger photosensitive seizures, not photosynthesis. They're not plants. And then, since this specific success criteria goes from 1A to AAA, we skipped Porygon 2. Sorry about that. And went straight to AAA evolution, which obviously has plus 102 benefits, because we do not want people to get a seizure if they consume our content. There's actually a tool that you can use to measure or kind of check video content, or probably also GIFs, the P tool. I have written about that in the LE News Substack. We've linked that specific article also, alongside with the background story of why the episode got banned because of triggering so many seizures. And what is also interesting to notice that seizures that are triggered by photosensitive input, they might seem on the first hand to be within the perceivable spectrum because it's light, it's visible, but it's actually optical because that is one of the things that stops you from using it. You can't really read what's on the webpage if you're having a seizure. Kind of a roadblock there. So this falls under the operable category. And yeah, obviously it affects people who are prone to photosensitive seizures. But interestingly enough, just because someone has a seizure once doesn't mean they have epilepsy, for example. So it's not really something where you would know if it would affect you unless you basically try it out and discover otherwise. So this is a very good one to just cover as a baseline and make sure to avoid at any time. Also pairs very well with not auto-playing animations and making animations controllable, because in that case, then you have the best possible control over the content to make sure, well, in case you are photosensitive, you do not want to start that and open that can of worms. And again, we have the QR codes to the understanding documents here. Yeah, Porygon gets a bit of bad rep, which is kind of sad, but I actually like him. He's a very cute Pokemon. And interesting also, fun fact, this was also the episode that changed Pikachu's Thunderbolt forever. Because after this, understandably, they dropped the strobe effects from the animation and changed it to be more seizure safe. And also something to note is, because we talked before about the robust criteria, that it is kind of a catch-all for how things present in different browsers. They're hard to represent with Pokemon itself, so we decided to represent them with the evolutions instead. Because screen readers in different browsers are kind of like the different evolutions. They don't necessarily okay, there's a picture. They don't necessarily are super different from each other. Like, at the core, they're still EVs, all of them. But the way they present them, the way they behave is a bit different depending on which combinations you use. So obviously I chose JAWS for Vaporeon because it fits just very well with the water theme. But JAWS in Chrome and JAWS in Firefox, for example, don't necessarily behave the same. Or JAWS in Chrome and NVDA in Chrome, which are two of the most commonly used combinations. They have a slight difference, not too much, not so much that it makes testing with them, it won't give you vastly different like reports. So it will still be the same content. If it's accessible per screen reader, it will be rendered usually with every screen reader, but the order in which it may be outputted can be different. And it's just good to know this, because if you expect a certain behavior from one type of screen reader and you happen to test with another one, or you'd only test with one type of screen reader, let's say VoiceOver, and you use it enhancing a ticket with, for example, JAWS, and says, hey, my screen reader doesn't work, it renders this and this, or it gives me a different output because of this and this. JAWS, for example, screen reader is very clever, and in case something isn't tagged properly or it's not defined properly, it will just take the next best thing and assume that it fits here. So for example, if there is a heading missing, it will skip to the next text content and read that out and just present that to you as if it was the heading, because it's just the next best content it gets, and it just tries it best, like a good Vaporeon. Now the obvious question is also like, which are the best evolutions, which are the best screen reader and browser combinations to test with. For that, you can reference the WebAIM Screen Reader Survey, which is an annual screen reader survey sent out by WebAIM. And it is also within the email that you only reply if you use screen readers, basically. But it's also important to notice that while these are the answers which they found, not everyone who is using a screen reader, not everyone who is relying on a screen reader is necessarily interested in web accessibility. Some people just want to go about their lives, just want to use their phone, and if they need a screen reader to access this, then so be it, but they don't necessarily are involved in web accessibility as much as we are, because they don't care. They just happen to use a screen reader because they need to, which I think is actually how we should approach most assistive technology. Don't necessarily think that the person who is using it cares a lot about what you do on the other end to make the website accessible. They just need it to be accessible in order to access it, because at the end of the day, every assistive tech user is also just a user who wants to access your web content, just maybe with different devices. But what's also good and good to keep in mind, and like have it as, well, number one, as reference for yourself, and number two, as a good statistic to show to other people in case they ask, okay, where like what is your reference for this? Where can we find some statistics on this? Just a baseline for arguing with your boss if you need to have to secure additional resources for accessibility. The screen reader survey is your best bet. So according to them, last year, the most popular combinations were JAWS with Chrome, NVDA with Chrome, then JAWS with Edge, NVDA with Firefox. So if you can test these free screen readers in, well, 4 different browsers, you cover a lot of ground actually. But what I would also suggest to you is that you don't underestimate the amount of people who use the inbuilt features. So each browser has their own text-to-speech features, and those always come pre-installed. So those are definitely the easiest to access. You just need to figure out where to start them, basically. And for people who, especially people who went brand over the course of their life, which is most of the people who are registered at Blind, they will make do with what they have already because it's just the cheapest option. And if it's already there, that's usually the first thing you try to use. So always consider the inbuilt devices. And if you already have data, for example, on how many people access your website from Firefox or from Chrome or from Microsoft Edge, then you can also translate that data into which screen reader will the people probably be using, because high chance it is also the inbuilt screen reader, and argue with that. And also NVDA, it is completely free, so that is also a very popular choice. JAWS is more used by people who use it actually for their job. So many people use it for the day job because it is a subscription service. So if you have more B2B customers, more likely that JAWS will be a higher percentage. So those are just statistics to keep in mind if you need to argue with people about which screen readers are more likely to be within your user base. Always keep it in context, like who are your users, and from there on, think critically, okay, these are more likely to use, all the demographics are more likely to use inbuilt screen readers because just they are there, they're easy to access. You can go to your local handy shop and or smartphone shops, and they will explain to you how to unlock a screen reader. And if you have more professional B2B content, more in the corporate SaaS sector, for example, stick with JAWS, very likely. And we also brought you a little example of what types of difference you can expect. So again, sticking with NVDA and JAWS as 2 of the most popular ones, this is the same table, which says choose your starter Pokemon. Then we have a column of person, we have Julia, Laura, we have the audience. We have our starter Pokemons. Julia has Pikachu, I have Eevees because I love them. And the audience is Magikarp. No shade, Magikarp is amazing, it turns into Gyarados. And then there are types, so Pikachu is Electro, Eevee is normal, and Magikarp is water. And NVDA will read it out as choose your starter Pokemon. Table with 4 rows and 3 columns. Choose your starter Pokemon, caption. So it first gives you the caption, tells you about the layout of the table, and then goes back to the caption. JAWS starts with the layout, table with 3 columns and 4 rows. Choose your starter Pokemon. Column 1, row 1, person. So it starts with the layout to give you a visualization of what size this table is, and then it jumps to the caption, and then it jumps right into the first tile of the table. Something that's also good to know about tables in general, if they are too complex, because not every table is just 3 columns and talks about Pokemon. Some are very, very advanced, especially if you're going, likely if you're using Excel, you will get tables in there. Something, but if you actually work with data, your tables are going to be heavily complicated. if they are properly they look amazing, color contrast and everything, of a table, just to make sure you have a short summary of what you're trying to take away or basically transmit to the audience from this table. Yeah, I think that is everything from the EVs and anything I can think of about tables so far.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, nice presentation. I think it's always, for me especially, I think it's way easier to understand things when you combine it with something you like and enjoy. I think it's fun. That's why I really enjoy the Pokedex of Accessibility and love to work more about it. So just in case you're curious about the what is going to come in the future with the Pokedex of Accessibility, is that, is this the right one? Yeah, I'm currently working on a small application which will be featured on the Pokedex of Accessibility, like a shuffle. I'm not sure if anyone knows the Pokemon game back for Game Boy Color in the 90s, where you can filter for WCAG success criteria to make it easier for you to understand. This is just an example and my first start of everything on how to filter the success criteria, because what I struggled, and I think I made also the mistake in my last webinar when I talked about the focus, where I said that the focus was, the color contrast of the focus element was not high enough. And I thought the success criteria for this was focus not visible. And I talked about it in my last webinar and I was proud of it. But of course I was so wrong, because it is visible, but the color contrast was the wrong thing on it, or the issue with it. So it should help you by filtering by keywords to really get the correct success criteria by filling out, what's the problem, or where do you see the problem, like the color contrast, and then it starts filtering out, okay, there could be contrast minimum, and also so that the database is not fully available now, and there would also be contrast enhanced with the AAA and such. This will be a part of the Pokedex of Accessibility. Of course, everything Laura mentioned here with Pokemon cards, and also the screen reader explanation and even more stuff. You can also find things about the Pokedex of Accessibility on Laura's accessibility news. Subscribe to it. She writes many great articles about Pokemon, but also about other stuff regarding accessibility, user experience, and research and such. For now, the Pokedex of Accessibility.com already exists. I bought the domain, so it's coming, but you will not find anything but this GIF, which you cannot stop, which means it's not accessible. Great, but you can turn on the music, and I just started with it today, so please be patient. So for the last part of today's session, we're going to talk about accessibility in open source. And why I think it's important is because open source in general is already something complicated. I know that. I also started out when I'm a self-taught developer, so for me it was like, how can I gain experience? And open source was the way to go. But how to start with open source? It's so complicated, or it seemed very complicated, how to get into Git and GitHub, how to use everything, how to connect with other developers, how to get into a project. Many things were coming up, but still I thought, okay, open source is the way to go to gain experience. When I want to get a job as a developer 3 or 4 years ago, and then I think Hacktober approached, so it's always in October, Hacktober, you know. So this is always a fun month, I think, and this really get me into, I want to be part of Hacktober, so I will get started with open source. And the only thing I knew back then, because the whole code bases seemed so big, and everything was already with container and Kubernetes, and I don't know even know the name for it. I just knew HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But then I thought, okay, there's one way I can be part of Hacktober and of open source, and this is accessibility. Because when you find a project, and I choose a project I knew, so a tool I was using almost every day, and this was DevTO. It's based on forum, and this is something you can write articles. You as a blog, you write your blog about development, any topic you're interested in. And I was very active in writing blog articles on DevTO. I also won web badges, and gamification is something I really go into, and then I kind of focus. And when there is this challenge or that challenge, I was very into it. And I wrote many blog posts on DevTO. So I thought, I know this tool. I'm working with it almost every day. I'm sure I can find an accessibility issue, like maybe a button does not receive focus, or where's the focus anyway on the whole site, or is the heading structure correct, something like this. So you can actually start out by going to the project. In Hacktober, I think everything is a bit more easier to understand, because all these groups and companies, or even companies, are on there. Not only this is not just private projects or small projects, but also real companies behind it. They help you with it. So there's also already the tag. You can look for projects with a tag Hacktoberfest, and then you will get a large list of projects. And let's say you're using forum, you can go to, this is to the official forum.devto, but you can go there and start testing. And accessibility testing, as I said, color contrast issue is something which is on almost every website out there. It's the most common issue, or the focus, or that tab order, something like this. And you could go to the website you want to join or want to be part of it to improve it and start testing it. Let's say I would test it for keyword and for focus order, and I'm not satisfied. I would say maybe, I think it's very good, but maybe back then it was not very satisfied, and you find the issue you want to work on. And now it's the time you start to writing issues, because you cannot just fix something you find on a project. There are rules. There are very strict rules. So it's the first thing you have to do is look at the issues which are already there, to not create a ticket which already exists. And you can use the labels, and they already have an extra filter label for accessibility. You can filter it, and then you could check, okay, what issues are there? So in case you did not find anything on the homepage and you want to work on an existing ticket, you can filter it and go through the list, which is labeled with accessibility. And I'm sure that these are things you can work on, even if only HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, or also maybe if you are not really into development itself, because I think mostly like color contrast fails accessibility. I'm not sure if you have to be a developer to change the hex code of color. So I would say this would be a ticket for almost everyone. But also, if you do not want to work directly on a ticket because you are maybe a tester and you do not have to do anything with code, or you are a project manager and still want to be part of Hacktober and only want to learn about accessibility and how to write tickets, accessible tickets, you could still be part of it and create a new one when you find an issue. And in this case, you would be able to create here a new issue. They already provide templates for you. Not every project does this, but this one is really good. And you could you could start with, because accessibility, when it's not working, then it's an error. You would start with the bug report. You go to this, and then you can fill it out. If you are not used to the format, which is a markdown, then I can tell you, you can click on preview, and then this would be how it looks like when you hand it in. You have to put in every information they want from you. So describe the bug, how to reproduce, because they do not simply believe what you're saying. Yeah, you have to say the focus was missing on the third button or on the button for submit. That's why you go to this specific page and you tap the focus button, let's say 5 times, until you reach the button submit, and then you will see or not see that the focus is missing. Like this. You have to also add that what is the expected behavior. So what do you want from the developer to fix? You want that there is a visible focus, and you do not only want a focus, but a focus with a minimum of contrast. So this is very important. So there is, when creating tickets, you really have to think very detailed. So for me as a developer, and let's say my partner developer I know is as good as I am in accessibility or even better, when I say, hey, a focus is missing, this I hope is everything I need to say, and they understand how to fix it. But if this is a junior developer and do not know anything about accessibility, they may add a focus, but the focus contrast is only 2:1, which is way too low. And then you can say, hey, you didn't implement accessibility, or you didn't think about accessibility, but I was the one creating the ticket, and I was not the one giving enough information for the junior developer to understand what they have to do. So that's why I will go over here. This would be a template for contrast ratio, what you could put into it. And of course, I share this. This is linked in the slides, so you have access to the template. You could, for example, say in the title of the ticket that the contrast ratio is too low on the main header text. And which WCAG does it fail? So the guideline is the WCAG 2.2, and the success criteria is 1 to 5 to 3, and it's level AA. You should always add some links that the developer or who is working on the ticket can learn more about the topic. The environment you used when you found the error, steps to reproduce, as I explained. You should be as detailed as possible, and what the actual result is, and why this is a failure, and what is the minimum we have to achieve to make it work, what the expected result is, what also give them information about the impact. So maybe they think, okay, what is the contrast issue? I don't get it. Isn't it, who cares about the contrast? Then you can give them more information about the impact that, yeah, maybe for you, because you have perfect vision, there's no problem, but think of people with low vision or with color blindness and such, they have trouble navigating. And then it's way easier to understand that, yeah, of course, I never thought about people with low vision, because I personally do not know one with low vision, so this was not on my mind. And then they will also start learning. So this is always why I write very detailed issues in that, because I hope they learn from the next issue what they have to think about it, and someday they won't need all this detailed explanation anymore. Yeah, but in the beginning it would be great to make it as detailed as possible. And then also how they could update it. If there is no design system available, then you can suggest a color and also say why it's good, like the contrast is then 5 to 5.2 to 1. So this is it would be great. But maybe you have a color, a design system, and then you should look at the colors which are available. And if there is no color available, no grayish color which would fit for this purpose, then you have to talk to the designer that they create one which would fit for it. So there are always more than one people involved in certain things. And also you can highlight it as a bug. And I personally would also make a difference in who is the one writing the ticket. I expect, as someone who works a lot with accessibility, that or a designer or a tester or a junior developer who are not familiar with accessibility write at least this sentence. So as a user, I want to perceive a submit button for the form element that meets WCAG 2.2 accessibility standards. The component must be operable with mouse and keyboard and for screen reader users, and has a visible focus indicator and maintain sufficient contrast. And if this is not enough for the developer, then they at least have so many keywords they can look up what is meant by, okay, what does the person mean, or what does the project manager mean with keyboard? Because I'm a mouse user, why would it be important? I think the main key terms are available. So it would be the bare minimum these member of development teams know about accessibility or know about a button, and how to provide information for a developer in a ticket so they can understand to create a new button. For a developer, on the other hand, so also for a developer who does not know about accessibility, but as a developer, I assume you know understand HTML. So it's plain HTML, which is our tool we are using. So this is what I'm doing, writing HTML. That you also know how a button is created to begin with, which makes it already, I think, as accessible as possible. That you have the same text as before, but then you can mention to a junior developer, for example, who is learning, and maybe you are their mentor or something, that you provide them with useful tips, like when creating the button, use the button element. So maybe the junior developer does not know about the button element, then I'm wondering why they got the job, but some people don't know. So use the button element, and a button element can and has to have certain attributes. There are more attributes, but there are simply a few attributes which every button should have, and this would be a type. And I think the types are a button of type of button, when it's a normal button with an action, or when it's a submit button, then they already have this the type of submit, which has how should I put it, internal functionality already built in, and reset button. And also that the button has to meet target sizes. So a button cannot be that small, because we have to fulfill every criteria. I think it's at least 24 pixels by 24 pixels. And when you want to reach AAA, then it has to be 40 or something. But these are new keywords for the developer to understand or to look up what is meant by target size recommendation, for example. So I think before I came into the development, or before I came into accessibility, I never thought about target size. I did not know the term at all. And this is something I learned through accessibility, that we have to make it a specific height and width. And of course, to not rely only on color to convey state, if it's a icon button or something, and that the color contrast, and that there are also different states, like when you have a button which is maybe clicked, and you want to show that it's currently clicked, then it should maybe be a different color than before, and that the current state still has enough contrast to the background. This is also important, that we have to check the text inside the button, when the button has a text, to its background color, and the background color of the button to the background of the website. Certain things like this. So I assume for a developer or a senior developer that they be more specific for other developers, or for junior developers, or for developers who are not that into accessibility than project managers. And yeah, and for the experience, I would suggest go into open source, try to understand Git and GitHub. No matter what position you are, it will help you anyways, because you are working in a development team. So I always think you should understand what's going on GitHub or where developers work. And yes, and for don't be afraid of open source. I shared many resources about how to get into open source. It's from Ayu. She was part of, for example, for my International Women's Day event. She's very into open source, and she wrote very detailed, very beginner friendly how to get into open source and how to improve in open source. And I shared her articles, which are also written on forum DevTO, to understand and get into open source for you to learn about it, for you to learn about accessibility when you do not have any other way to learn about web accessibility, how to write tickets, to create tickets, to fix tickets, working on a real code base. Yeah, and this would be it for today. Thank you for joining. For the next session, I have the wonderful Emma Dawson filling in for me. I'm hopefully being back in June. If not, then Laura's doing it. She doesn't know yet. But yeah, the next session is about the European Accessibility Act, because it's happening soon in June. So she will prepare you to be on top, to prepare your company for the Accessibility Act, and to fulfill to fill the whole hour. She will also talk about integrated accessibility testing, a topic I also do not know anything about. That's why I'm very happy that she is filling in and talking about the accessibility testing stuff with end-to-end testing and working with Playwright and Storybook and such, because I have never worked with it before. But I think it's very it's interesting, it's necessary, and you should do it, but it's always depending on the job you're working or the project you're working with, if this is happening or not. So until now, I never had to do it. Yeah, unfortunately. Then, of course, you will find all the session material from today and all the previous ones on the GDG community website, also on my personal website, Accessibility First, available in English, German, and Japanese. Also follow the Accessibility newsletter for the upcoming events. And the resources of today, as I said, the open source articles by Ayo Adati, and everything I shared with you today, additional resources about the Pokemon and my templates. The resources I share every time, because these are just the basics and the articles you should simply read and the people you should follow, because they are on top. And yeah, now it would be time for the Q&A session. I'm not sure if Laura is ever coming back. Oh, sorry, she's an attendee. I give her presenter mode again. We are happy to do the Q&A. I have not checked the chat. If there is a question, feel free to use the chat. Feel free to use the Q&A section. We're open to any questions. Does not have to do anything with today's topic, but we love to talk about Pokemon even more. Any other question is also very welcome. But I think when going through the chat, I cannot see any question. How did you two first get in? I was young. I'm a person of the 90s. When Pokemon came into our European TV, I was 10 years old. It was 1998, and I was all for Pokemon. And I started with the red edition. It's important. The red one. I think it's the better one. Oh, Richard. Wondering if there was an excerpt for the users with low vision, no blind or color blind. I'm not sure if I understand. the question. Laura, do you have anything to say about Kana's nose comment or question?
That's
So
not
the
loading
comment
at the
is
moment.
Okay, the comment is wondering if there was an excerpt for the users with low vision, not blind or colorblind.
So the difference between blind, low vision, partially sighted. I don't think the web content guidelines distinguish based. But that also has to do with how the web of what benefits the most people possible. So if you fulfill them, you will kind of catch the most amount of people and the most amount of users. Well, also the most amount of different, the broadest pool of disabilities possible, so to say. Maybe to make that a bit easier to understand, when I was in web accessibility, I didn't really think much about how the web content made. Once I went into assistive tech, I had a lot of aha moments, realizing, that's how people actually use assistive tech, and then I realized that, now it makes sense that, as you said before, you have to apply color contrast to the focus as well, because that is how people use their screen reader sometimes. People will have the colors completely inverted, so you read in dark mode, and then there are softwares that match the words which are being read out to the focus. So it is also kind of what you see with some captions on TikTok and Instagram, when the word that is being spoken gets a bit bigger or gets a different color, highlighted in a different color while it is being said. And there are softwares which do exactly the same for reading on desktop, and you pair them with a screen reader, so that, because complete blindness is super rare actually, so most screen reader users actually have some amount of vision. Could be partially sighted. Actually, partially sighted people tend to use more zoom. Again, just whatever works for your vision level will be the setup you go for. And for most people, it's a mix and match of anything that serves them. So low vision people tend to combine screen readers and just zooming in a lot to kind of get the best of both worlds. And screen reader is obviously easier to read faster. If you have only like 20 words on a screen, it will take forever to read an ebook, for example. But if there's a word where you're not sure about the pronunciation, there's some special characters used, or you just didn't quite catch it because your screen reader went over it too fast, then some people will just zoom in on that and go back to figure out what it is. If I answered the question, but that was the first.
And an additional comment from Kana was that not only the group of the users with low vision, but when it's not, the font is not large enough, for example, like the magnifier problems, that people have to use magnifier and zoom in. So they do not rely on alt text, for example, because they do not use a screen reader, or not necessarily use screen reader, but rely on magnifier to zoom in and make the content larger, to be able to read the text. Is there any comment, or do you have experience with user research for this particular people, with these people, or with this kind of disability?
No dedicated for like alt text and screen readers on. Like how many people are classified as as partially sighted, low vision, or blind. Depending on the country, they can be named different, and it can vary a bit in like what the exact distinction is. So, for example, am I back?
Yes.
Okay. They could be classified as not blind, but severely visually impaired. So one step above that, I guess. Just because we have different thresholds for what country's social system and your partially also on your medical system, what is section. Because most of the times disability, the system that defines you as legally disabled is tied to your local authority and also usually disability benefits and what kind of support you can access. It's less a question of how much you can actually see. Sections you into this bucket of vision and this bucket of severely vision impaired or whatever. This is also where we have different terms. States, different countries.
I think a common problem or a main problem of this for low vision is also that there is no real guideline for it. I think you should use at least 16 pixels for fonts on the page, but the main thing you have to provide as a developer is that people are able to zoom in 200%. So I think you are not, you don't have to use a certain font size to make it readable in the very beginning. And of course, this could be a problem also for people who get a low vision in a later stage and do not know about the zoom stuff. Yeah, but unfortunately, I think there is no real guideline that you, yeah, with the color contrast in combination, then yes, that you have to, when you use a certain color, then you have to have at least this kind of pixels for your font, and it has to maybe be also bold. But in general, if the text recommended is the text is minimum 16 pixels, and I think nowadays people working in the accessibility area tend to use even 18 pixels as a standard. But of course, often the footer is very small, 14 pixels, 12 pixels maybe. But yeah, this is, I think, because there are no guidelines for it, and the developer maybe assumes that if you have problems reading it, then you zoom in. Unfortunately. Yeah, and from Friedrich, I'm not sure if you can read now the chat. That would be a last question for Laura. Should I read it, or can you access it?
Yeah, about back regarding understandability from those younger generation of Pokemon. But the good thing is the target demographic is more developed, 18 above at least, Pokemon. There are newer generations of Pokemon. There are older ones, but it's reach everyone. I've gotten also feedback from people who are not necessarily younger, but who just don't really care much about Pokemon. So they're like, okay, what is that supposed to be? Like, so it might not actually be the age culture. But I realized that not everybody is going to be interested in Pokemon. And for the people who are, this can be a nice resource. Just again to now with the European Accessibility Act coming up and just legislature being more strict on it, which is a good thing, people tend to get scared of it because you kind of have to do it. Be intimidating, it's fun, and kind of taking away of that's the main goal. And for people who don't understand Pokemon or are just not into Pokemon, there are a lot of other grassroots initiatives. For example, there are now in plain English or in easy language. There are also community efforts. They may not be in, like, I think, wider audience, and just breaking it down to be less intimidating than the official documents.
Yeah.
But I still think everyone should read the official documents. Definitely not all at once. That's a bit a lot. And understand every once in a while, just because they're, again, very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I think this would be it for today. It was a long session and hopefully very informative. Lots of information. And Lisa joined later. Yes, the recordings will be available on my blog, Accessibility First, under the webinar series, or on the GDG where you registered for the event in the next few days. Recording slides and everything. Yeah, so I'm hopefully join the next session in May about the European Accessibility Act. Thank you for today. Thank you for joining me on stage and talking about your Pokedex of Accessibility. And I think this would be it. See you next time, everyone. Thank you.
And thank you for letting me ramble about Pokemon.